Welcome to Therapist Off Script, a podcast designed with therapist in mind as we discuss all things psychotherapy practice, the good, the bad, and the truly mind-blowing adventures of being a therapist in process. Hang on as we dive deep, join together, and empower others for the journey of a lifetime.
Well, I just failed my first law and ethics practice test, as expected. So,
You just passed it? Is that what you said?
No, I failed it as expected.
Oh, I thought you said I just passed it as expected.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, what do you mean by failed? What does that mean?
Like if the cutoff is around 70%, I got 64%.
Okay, and it's your first time taking it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So don't be discouraged because that's normal. People usually get a lower score and then it shows you growth points to focus on. And then normally you get higher scores. Those things are not easy. So what was your experience like taking it?
Like all the other multiple choice tests I've taken. I don't do well on them. So.
Oh. What happens for you?
I think I do well. I read the questions, I evaluate all the answer choices, and then I make the best decision, and then they're usually wrong.
Yeah, so it's like the filtering through the questions. So yeah. Those tests are not easy. And I didn't know if I was passing or failing like the whole time I took both the law and ethics and the clinical. Like when I took the clinical and I passed, I thought, oh, they made a mistake. What happened with the glitch in the system? Like I couldn't believe it. So yeah, I'm sure it's discouraging to get a 68 though.
Or 64.
Oh, 64. I thought you were 68. I processed a lot of information today. I had 2 assessments. I was telling one of my colleagues it used to take me at least up to 8 hours, a little bit over sometimes, to write an assessment because of how convoluted their assessments were. It takes me like 30 minutes to write an assessment now, and that includes a treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm like, it's so awesome. Like I wrote 2 assessments and a progress note before I signed in with you. So, but I have processed a lot of information. So yeah.
But it's so much easier to do documentation when you're not working with county or any similar facilities, agencies.
Yes, so much that it's just they make it harder than it needs to be, and it creates barriers. So talking about you taking your first law and ethics and not getting a passing score, you know where I'm going, don't you?
Oh, yes, but
What?
no.
What?
Let's go.
What is our podcast topic today? Is that where you thought I was going?
Yeah, yes.
Do you want to rethink the podcast topic?
No, it's fine. This is authentically us. This is part of what we do. We are humans too, and we go through all the same life ups and downs as anybody else. Maybe different contexts, but yeah.
Yeah, the trials and tribulations along the path to licensure.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And I told you after my clinical, my palms sweated for 6 months afterwards. And I was not a good test taker. My husband is a good test taker. I was not. Notice the past tense I'm using. Current day, put any test in front of me because of the BBS test, I can take and pass pretty much any test now. Because I learned a lot of test taking strategies within it. And I learned a lot about myself. Like my mind goes blank for the beginning of it, which we've discussed before. So hold on, wait, embrace, do what I can. And then once my mind catches up, then I'm able to process differently. But yeah, I do really good with tests now. So
And
it's something
your
to look forward
secrets
to.
are, yeah, and your secrets are what strategies have you learned along the way?
The most one that's been most beneficial for me is the process of elimination. So get it down to at least 2, to trust your gut, to not get caught up in it for too long, because you remember when we talked about the test and I put the 4 quadrants for the 100, I think it was 170 questions, 4 hours you get. Is that correct?
Is that for clinical?
Clinical.
Yeah, the law and ethics is you have 90 minutes to do 75 questions.
Okay.
And of those, only 50 of them count because 25 of them are experimental.
Basically 75 questions, 90 minutes, just 1 question per minute, essentially.
Yeah.
Think of it that way.
You have 1 question per minute.
Mhm.
That leaves you 15 minutes to review and go back and go to the ones that you marked. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah. So if you notice you're on minute 32 and you're still on question 15, you need to speed up, and you're over processing, So trusting yourself, because this time is like meant for, here's a scenario that popped up with my client, talking with your supervisor, processing it through. And the way you approach one problem or one challenge may not be the way you process it the next time. But during this time, it teaches you like processing skills and how to like quick make decisions. So if a client is suicidal, you can know what you need to do, what you need to put in action without panicking. So in the beginning, it is very much like a panic. As you do more and more, it's like, yes, that alertness is there, but you have a sense of grounding that you can pull from.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I did recognize, like, if it says legal or ethical, like, aha, underline that, because there are some issues that are both legal and ethical. And so if the question is asking you specifically from the legal lens, and I did notice, like, oh, if I was thinking about it in ethics terms, that would be the answer to it, but that's not what they want. Or also things like, what's the first thing an MFT should do?
Always
like,
safety.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Always securing the client's safety whenever, that's always number 1. And then you go to the next ones.
Yeah. Because all the answer choices are things like, oh yeah, like that's part of the process, but
what's the first thing?
The first one. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So it makes you a better, not better, I guess it is better, but well-rounded therapist to go through the process of studying, taking the test, and so on and so on. So, but when, like over processing or having anxiety or perfectionism shows up, that can like create hurdles. And there's other barriers within the mental health field, like the cost, So processing, people who have a diagnosis of like ADHD, trying to sit down and take a test. I mean, they may be very effective with their clients, but trying to like push through that cognitive processing, really hard. Yeah. So anxiety,
Yeah.
But my biggest goal is the process of elimination. So
yeah. And like just in general too, I mean, I don't have any clients after this, or I knew to save that until after I had clients. Like I was studying like in between sessions, but I made sure to not do anything except for this, obviously, after the exam, just in case. And same thing like with the actual exam. I don't think I'm not going to do anything that day for sure. Yeah. Because I'll either need that time to to grieve my self-esteem and dignity, or I'm gonna want to celebrate the crap out of this.
Right.
So, currently grieving, as we can see, but that's a temporary thing, as everything else is. Yeah. Hopefully.
You remember my story, my experience of when I took my law and ethics, I took the mock exams. And it totally like fucked me up, psyched me out. I rescheduled my law and ethics because of how much of a mind fuck it did on me, right? And then when I did my clinical, I nixed the mock exams. I didn't even take them because I had to like just go, okay, I know this stuff. I've studied my ass off, and I'm going to go in, and whatever it is, it is. If I pass, glorious celebration. If I didn't, great morning. lost, but it's okay because I'll take it again. And so I pretty much just handed it over and just sat down and did the best I could. And thankfully I passed. So, but there's like this lingering, like I get where you're, at least in some part, like when you signed on, I could feel it like, ooh, what's going on? I just failed my mock. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's probably what helps me, like, ooh, something's up. Like if a client logs in or walks into the session, like, okay, this is not going to be just a chill, like, week was good. We want to process this. Like, now some shit happened. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're no different. We're human and we have disappointments and we have certain bars we set for ourselves, so yeah. And speaking of that, this week's topic is on people pleasing and perfectionism and how it can show up in our field for both the therapist and the clients. Welcome to Therapist Off Script. We are two therapists, Jen and
Alyx, in the mental health and wellness space, coming together from different points in our profession
to unlock the world of healing arts and all that it holds of being a psychotherapist in practice,
regardless of where we are in the process.
While we are therapists, this podcast is not meant to be therapy or supervision. Should we mention clients, we are committed to safeguarding our client confidentiality.
Please know that information presented here is intentionally de-identified, with details changed and are often a representation of common challenges we've witnessed within the struggles of life and simply being a human.
Come spend time with us as we show up as unapologetically us. We are Therapist Off Script. So where do you want to start?
I think with the people pleasing, it also kind of, let's start with the people pleasing because it's going to go into all sorts of stuff. What jumps out at me is, so from therapist standpoint, especially, budding therapist as an associate and having a supervisor and working since I'm in two different settings, I have similar situations as far as like, opportunities could easily be specifically for me and my own personal growth, just as easily as it could be, I want to make sure that I'm the best that I can possibly be, that they can see that I'm the best that there ever is and be the perfect, whatever my, like, the ideal worker is. That can easily lead to overextending or crossing my own boundaries and letting other people cross them, which of course leads to rust out and burnout. The same thing can be said for just people in general. Like I noticed that even in my own personal life, I've been doing a lot of that. Like over the years, I put my own stuff aside for the sake of other people or being the ideal person, the ideal parent, the ideal daughter, trying, sometimes failing at literally everything, which is fine because it's part of the process. In that, the same thing with like clients on the client side. There's the idea of like being the ideal client. Like I'm going to answer the questions to the questionnaire because I think that's what they want me to answer. Or I'm going to, like there was a homework assignment assigned. I didn't do it, but I'm going to say that I did anyway. And all of the above were not being authentic.
Which can go against one of our like greatest values is showing up as authentically us, while also paralleling unapologetically us, which can tap into the rebel minded and heart, right?
Yeah.
I tend to pair people pleasing and perfectionism kind of synonymously, but then also having like a component of, how you have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then you have flop. Right. And so fight and flight, it's gonna get me all tongue tied. Fight and flight, we kind of know that. Fight is you're like all the blood goes to the core, you're ready to like fight off you're like the lion and you're going to defend. Say it again.
It's go time.
It's go time. I'm going to stand my ground and I'm going to fight it out. Like your body prepares for that energy, right? Then you have flight, which means you're fleeing the situation. Your body becomes like mobile, same situation where the blood is flowing and you're like your digestive system shuts down and you just flee.
Bye.
Right. And that can kick in when you're like just sitting in a room, say a classroom or a conference or like a work meeting, and all of a sudden you get this surge of energy because something's happening inside of you and you want to like leave. Some kind of discomfort is showing up, but you don't necessarily leave, but you still experience it. Right. So this can kick in.
Or like being in the exam room or the waiting room ready to take that law and ethics test.
Exactly.
I would very much like to run.
Yeah, you can get that experience or that sensation of desiring to flee because there's discomfort. And so when we do things like dialectical behavioral therapy with distress tolerance skills, the things we teach our clients, if that's a modality or orientation we're using with our clients, we can also use that on ourselves. And I would highly recommend that whatever orientation you're using, use it on yourself also within your life, because those who live it can teach it at a deeper level. Right. And so using this distress tolerance. The third one is freeze. So like a deer in headlights, you're immobile, you can't move. Right. I'm going to skip to flop and then I'm going to come back to fawn because that's the one I want to talk about. Flop is like you're just, if you imagine like your window of tolerance, do you know what the window of tolerance is? And then above is like the hyper arousal, the below is the hypo arousal. Flop is like your system just like shuts down, just at a greater level than freeze from my perspective, right?
Now we're like full on in dissociation mode and
yeah, it's like dropping
there. Yep.
Yeah, your whole system is like just right. And then we go back to fawn, and this is the one I want to talk about. I pair it with people pleasing and perfectionism. Those who have that fawn response could have grew up in like a household where they had to please others in order to stay safe. There was a threat present. They had to sacrifice their own needs in order to keep the perception of at least that connection. Their worth and their value may have been dependent on another's versus finding the worth and value in themselves, right? They may have been invalidated by their caregiver, and now current day, that has carried over, that template has carried over to their adult life. And now they are, what were the things I said? There's a threat present. Someone's needs is important, or the perception of importance. We sacrifice our needs in order to meet that need and in order to keep connection, have a feeling or sensation of worth and value, the perception of safety, and all of the above. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sounds about right. Yeah, I talk about that a lot in most of my groups, actually, and with most of my clients. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. Yeah, so I agree with fawn being very like people pleasy perfectionism. And I think also just it extends not just from like childhood, and it goes for like every aspect. Like, and it kind of, what jumps out at me is like the whole like rest out to burnout, like how rest out is very insidious. Like this fawn or the people pleasing and the perfectionism can be very insidious too. Like unless you're like, in a sense, you kind of have to be hyper aware of it,
right?
Because it's always there and it can seep in weird ways. Like the more you think about it, the more like I think about it, like, oh, like, evaluating this situation versus this situation, like, oh yeah, it's there in both ways, but it kind of shows up differently too.
Yeah. Talk more about, if you're comfortable, I mean, don't give any identifying information or anything, but if you are walking into a room to do a training or like a therapy group on people pleasing and perfectionism, like what does that look like? Like what does that look like?
It shows up in self-compassion. Okay. I do a lot of that. And things like, okay, the compassionate friend. I love the compassionate friend because usually, since if we're people pleasing, we push our stuff aside and we're super compassionate to literally everybody else except for ourselves. So use that against us / for us. Technically it's for us. But like, how would you treat somebody who's going through what you're going through if it's not you? Like, put your struggles into somebody else's body and look at and talk to them. What would you say? What would you recommend they do? Obviously it's inside of you because you're the one that's saying it, and then you've manifested it, like it's out in the universe now. or I'll literally have them write it down too. We do a lot of writing exercises that way, like it's there on paper. Now you can see it, put it somewhere where you see it every single day.
Yeah, I like that, the writing, like the journal aspect, because there's like a science behind that. Like if we just have this difficulty within our mind and we're like ruminating on it or looping with it, and it's just stuck, right? But as soon as we get a pen and paper and we start writing it out, that's the processing. Like that difficulty begins to flow out of us and onto the paper, and we start seeing maybe patterns, processing, linking. Oh, here's some solutions, and our brain starts working that way. And so I love journaling with it, with the clients who are open to it. Not like I'm sitting with them like journaling, but like, for example, sometimes I'll end sessions and I say, after our session, I want you to brain dump whatever stood out to you from this session that we may or may not talked about, like expanded upon. I want you to dump it on a piece of paper. And then between now and the next time I see you, I want you to pay attention, like what bubbles up, what surfaces. And I want you to keep track of that and then bring it into the next session, because that's going to be our like continuity from the last session, to keep processing at deeper and deeper levels, to process, to connect, to, link and all of that. And so, yeah, that's one way I use a therapy tool. And I use the best friend, which I think is derived from solution focused therapy, brief therapy. And where do you think it's from? Is you also?
Oh, Kristen Neff.
Oh yeah, Kristen Neff with self-compassion. Yes, that's a good resource. So yeah, I'm gonna write that down to link it or put it in our show notes. Another thing with the Fawn response is like that thread is there. We almost like diffuse conflict by abandoning our own needs in the favor, which is kind of what I said earlier, for the favor of another's needs. It could show up in, not always, but codependency. I'm trying to think other ways, like lack of healthy boundaries. What are some other ways that you see it showing up?
In relationships with narcissistic personality disorder. Also just in general, like friend conflicts or just conflicts in general, where like you typically, or the people pleaser, the fawn would be the middleman oftentimes. Like that's how I end up in it.
The mediator.
The mediator. Yeah. Whereas like I'm trying to like appease both parties so that to keep the peace and make sure that everybody's satisfied, but the only one that ends up not being satisfied is oftentimes me.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a denial of needs. People could also have trouble saying no. They lack, at least in the current day, the ability to choose their yeses wisely. And so that's something I work with clients also, is to first like name their needs, become aware of them, because when we become aware of them, there's a saying, and I actually have it written down on my computer: the light of awareness and compassion extinguishes the darkness that keeps us wounded. And I couldn't tell you where I heard that, but I had it wrote down on my computer.
I like it.
Yeah. So the light of awareness and compassion extinguishes the darkness that keeps us wounded. And so as soon as we get that awareness paired with self-compassion, like, like healing can begin. Like, I think of like the wounds. Can't see my arm. We all get wounds in life. Some of them never heal, or like we think they're healed and then something happens and they get ripped open again. Scars are part of life, but scars are beautiful can be beautiful because it shows that healing and has occurred, and no longer is the threat of that wound getting like ruptured again present. Or if it does start to like a little bit, like it's not going to take us down. And so I think it's the wounds versus scars. So,
but it's enough to notice so that you can ideally address it in a better way, because you've gone through at least some level of healing. Also with the awareness and the putting it out there in the universe, like you're manifesting it. Like if you say it out loud, you've manifested it. It's out there. You wrote it down. You can see it. Like it's out there, right? Like using your senses, it's there. If you hear it, you say it, you hear it, which is why, be very careful with what you say, especially when you're talking about yourself, because your brain hears that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we all live with voices in our heads as like those important role models or caregivers. There's another thing that just crossed my mind. I'll tell you in a minute, but we all live with those voices, and that includes our voices, and what we speak and what we believe becomes who we are. And so being able to have like those affirmations, and I'm very much like lean towards the woo woo a little bit within manifesting and putting it into the universe. And I'm like so proud of that. And I'm okay if people don't like that, because I'm unapologetically me, and that's okay. Okay, what popped into my mind? There is something called a pseudo spouse that I just learned about. Have you heard of a pseudo spouse? I've heard of parentification, but I've never heard of a pseudo spouse. And so a pseudo spouse is a child who they provided emotional support to their parents. They became a pseudo spouse, whereas the parent should have been that emotional caregiver for them to teach them how to balance and recognize their emotions, right? Some of these children grow up to be therapists, right? Because they've learned that. Let's see, I wrote down, they were supposed to be your emotional support, but you were theirs. You tried to please them. So think of fawning. You tried to make them happy, do things for them, and like all these different things, right? And I think of a military child sometimes, because that is a potential thing that can happen when one partner is away on deployment for the military, and you have a parent left at home trying to carry the house, the kids, if they have children, the pets, the day-to-day responsibilities. And some of those children, me being one of them, became that pseudo parent for my mother, and that carries over. And I'm very aware of it, because I know I have the potential to fawn. And I know I become, as an empath, susceptible to energy vampires, and narcissism is one of those energy vampires, right? And so through awareness, I'm able to extinguish that darkness through the light of awareness and compassion for myself. Because when I stumble or I don't do things perfectly, like that's okay, because it extinguishes the darkness that keeps us wounded. And so my wound may get opened up a little bit, but it doesn't like annihilate me at this point. So
yeah, I could be better about it with the people pleasing. I'm working on it. I've definitely set a lot more boundaries, especially like with friendships lately, like just recognizing, ooh, this is not a friendship. This is not mutual. This is me basically giving my all to people who wouldn't give me the time of day, and I deserve better than that. So,
right.
But the perfectionism, I've noticed, I mean, it's still there, clearly, as per the conversation about the exam, but I noticed that it is easier to be aware and do something about it in some aspects of my life than it is in others. Like with the exam stuff, it's very clearly there. With the dancing, with the like me, like clinically as a therapist, it's a lot easier to not only be aware of it, but also give myself grace for it. That I learned during my traineeship. Yeah. During grad school, one of my supervisors, it was a big thing that we had the whole conversation about, and it stuck with me. And it's because of that conversation is what has helped me with perfectionism, how it shows up in like every other aspect of my life too.
It like became that light of awareness, and then you paired it with compassion, which you're practicing the compassion that you are teaching your clients. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, with the best tools are those that we ourselves use. And we all have stuff, we all have stories. It's what we do with them that makes the difference. And it sounds like you have had a good supervisor during your training site. I'm assuming you no longer have that supervisor.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So
occasionally I should reach out to her and say hi, but yes.
Yeah. So as an associate or even a trainee, we have these people that can show up in our lives as supervisors, and you have a good supervisor that can have those difficult conversations, because it's going to make you a more effective therapist when you become aware of these tendencies that we all have potential for.
But not even just an effective therapist, an effective human.
100%. Thank you.
And like with the comment about like the, us using our own tools, I make sure that like in all of my groups or activity I have the clients do, I'm doing it alongside with them. When we discuss, I may not disclose nearly as much as the clients do.
Right.
Just,
Appropriate
but,
disclosure. Yep.
yeah, but I will use some self-disclosure provided that it's clinically relevant. And even if I don't see anything about myself at all, like there are times where like, for the sake of time, like we don't even have time for me, that's fine. Like this is good. Like they're sharing, go for that. But like I still did the exercise and I'm still processing like, oh, that came up. Interesting. Which is then more, information for my own therapy or to process with my supervisors. Yeah. Or here, or, just awareness.
Right. It kind of taps into, I've heard it both ways, but person of the therapist and self of the therapist. It's where we're learning about ourselves as humans, as therapists, as both, in order to be more effective within this world and our craft that we are doing within the healing arts. And I think that is a beautiful thing. Other things that we can do, like learning to say no, appropriate no's, knowing our own needs, which we said earlier, defining what an actual healthy relationship looks like, going into acceptance and commitment therapy, knowing our values-based actions and beliefs and attitudes in order to guide us. Because if it's a conflict of a value between A and B, we know we want to make more towards moves within, I'm thinking of a choice point right now. We want to make more towards moves. And if we're faced with a friend reaching out, asking for us to do, let me think, there's past people who reach out to me to, like, for example, hey, can you write me a recommendation letter? Right. And this is just like a complete like example. And I'll be like, okay, well, I don't really have time to write 1,000 people's recommendation letter, right? And so I put it back on them and I say, okay, you write the recommendation letter and then I will edit it to base my perspective, but at least I'm not devoting all of that time and energy into that letter, right? That's my way of saying no and not fawning, because I would be sacrificing my needs with, we only have so much time in a day. And sometimes I've got a lot crammed into a day with all the things I do. So yes, I can meet that need for you, but here's what you need to do. So I put it back on the person. And then they decide whether or not they want to devote that to themselves, because it takes a lot to write a recommendation letter. Yeah. What are some other ways besides compassion, defining healthy relationships, knowing your values, learning how to say no? Like, is there anything that we're missing?
I'm trying to think, because the way that I see it, they're broad enough that kind of over encompasses everything. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm making it one.
Yeah, so we can like bring it down if you wanted to. Another thing is like knowing your goals and dreams so that we know the mark that you're heading towards, right? Yeah. So yeah, they're kind of broad enough. Is there anything that within those that you're thinking of?
Well, the second that you said goals, yeah, another thing that I typically do or work with people on is like whenever you're establishing goals, and ideally, like we've already talked about values. So then your goals are going to be essentially, or your values are guides for your goals. So if your goals align with your values, you're killing two birds with one stone. But I love the idea of celebrating ourselves. I love the idea of making things as easy and simple as possible. Simple is not necessarily easy and vice versa. So if you have a goal, then okay, cool. Or maybe we work together on establishing the larger goal. Let's break it up into as small pieces as possible, because especially with perfectionism, a lot of that can lead to procrastination. Like, oh, this is a huge thing. Like, I have to do it right. And I'm not going to start it until I know that I can finish it and finish it well. So if you break up that goal into smaller tasks, then it's a lot easier to, it's still an achievement. Even if like step one of the goal is to get out of bed. Okay, I can do that. And then that's an accomplishment. For, some people it is 100% an accomplishment to get out of bed or to wake up by a certain time, or, this is me saying that the goal is involving self-care and just normal daily activities of daily living. But it could also be like competing in a dance competition. Step one is sign up for class. Step two is go to class. Step three, all these little things, as little as possible. And make sure that you reward yourself, because that perfectionism that eats away at the self-confidence is going to need those rewards and those little accolades that we can give ourselves, even if it's like a little smiley face, or like we have that Finch self-care app that like you just check the box, and then it gives you a little confetti, like you did it. Sometimes it's those little things like, yeah, I did it.
Yeah, that's very behavioral with like the token economy and the reinforcers, right? When you were talking about self-care, I thought a work-life balance within the context of goals, and that can show up as a trainee or associate within self-care. And we've talked a lot. I think we always come back to self-care because of how vitally important it is to not rust out, burn out in this field, because you get all your hours done and then you decide, I'm done. Like I can no longer be in this petri dish of dysfunction, because it can be very dysfunctional if you don't have those healthy boundaries. You don't know how to say no. You don't fully partake in self-care. And that can look like a variety. For anyone listening, refer back to the last episode at least, but there's other episodes that we've done and talked about self-care within work-life harmony or balance. And so different settings within a trainee or associate, that even goes back to I think it was episode 1, we talked about choosing your work site wisely, because, some practices are just, they serve as a churn mill for associates. They're just going to bring you in, they're going to eat you up, they're going to use you for all you've got, because people who come into the field usually are very high energy and interest and like driven by passion. By the time they come out the other side of that churn mill, not all practices are like this, but there are some there that are very predatory. They come out the other end and they are burned out. They have health dysfunctions. Like they lose relationships because they don't have that work-life balance or that self-care, whatever that may look like for the individual. And so, yeah, so that's something I was like thinking of as you were talking.
Yeah, so there's that. I have two things. So with that, there's a lot of the people pleasing, and the people pleasing is like the sure way of leading to rust out and burnout, especially in those cases. And adding another layer, like there's maybe a pressure of, oh, if I don't do all of this, then I'm gonna get fired, or then I'm gonna get let go, and then what am I gonna do? So I have to do all these things and make sure that everybody's happy and say yes to absolutely everything.
Right.
But then we know what the outcome is.
Yeah, at to what cost, what the benefit versus the cost, because right now the mental health field, based on my like knowledge and what I'm seeing, my perception. So, everybody check this out for yourself. There is too many clients, not enough therapists. Practices from a group owner perspective, you like trying to find an associate to come in and to like the interviewing process, and like you're going to be able to find a site. So, I mean, and be picky with it, but not too picky. Have realistic expectations, but don't willingly go into a site where everybody looks burned out, because there's red flags present if we choose to see them. But if we have the tendency to people please or have perfectionism or the Fawn response, we can choose, or maybe unconsciously we're choosing to not see those red flags until we're in the depths of it. And then that is where I call it in cognitive behavioral therapy, or even DBT or ACT, thought traps, which is cognitive distortions. And those thought traps have a way of entrapping us, keeping us stuck in life, right? And so I'm going to get fired could show up as catastrophizing or minimizing the positives, right? And then also another thing I was thinking of is being aware of our defense mechanisms, because fawning can be a defense mechanism. And if we know our defense mechanisms, we've identified, going into acceptance and commitment therapy, notice and name. When we notice that either a thought trap or defense mechanism has been engaged, and we've already thought of it ahead of time, kind of like natural disaster preparedness, we know what to do in response. And the best time to practice those survival skills is when there's no threat present, right? So when the threat inevitably comes up, whether it is a boss asking you to work your 14th day in a row, or take on one more client, which ends up being 10 more clients, and you're
zero to that.
Yeah. And before you know it, you're in like, and nothing against community mental health, it serves a purpose, but you're in like 153 clients, like, And you're seeing client after client after client, they become numbers to you because you just can't keep up and have that deep personal level of a relationship that is often required for that deep healing. Yeah. And so it's detrimental. It's not cool.
Especially with the population, like, in line with the community mental health, like the population that tends to be seeking services at community mental health could really benefit from that deeper level. But yeah, it's counterproductive. Or
very like person-centered, humanistic would be a good thing. And I'm going to kind of like go on a rant, but our field is headed towards a medical mindset, when really, like holistic can be very good. And yes, the medical mindset, it's like you have your goals, you have your treatment plan, you know where you're heading and all of that, but that's the destination. It's like how you get there. That's the beauty. It's that relationship, that beneficial relationship, as far as like having someone in your court, rooting you on, like helping, becoming that attachment figure, and then like, tapering off so that there's connections in the community. But sometimes people need that because they're alone in this world. So yeah, but that is not the topic. The topic is perfectionism, people pleasing, and apparently fawning, because we've added it in. So
because fawning is people pleasing, or people pleasing is fawning, or whatever the fuck. Yeah.
Synonymous, I think they all like evolve into each other and borrow from one another, and there's layers within it. So
yeah. I want to focus on perfectionism a little bit more.
Okay, good for it.
So with the perfectionism, obviously, like, yeah, there's the world in general, especially our society, like our country or society, and then, being in California, me being in the tech mecca, there is so much pressure to be the best, to be perfect. Like, Amazon will cut the bottom 10% worker or performers every whatever, like, you have to be up there to even be at Amazon anyway. So
while Twitter just cuts them randomly.
Yeah, right. So then then you never know. Like, okay, so with that, then you're gonna be working your ass off to be, perfect. And then it doesn't matter anyway, because you get cut at random. Or you just drive yourself to the ground regardless of what the reasoning is.
Mm-hmm.
But, as far as, so we get clients that deal with that. So working with perfectionists, I love that. Like I feel like, I don't know, we were talking about marketing last week, and I think that's what I ended up saying, as far as like, oh, if I had to choose a niche, but like I'm like leaning more towards that, like every day, like, okay, yeah, I don't know, because I don't want to pigeonhole myself, but at the same time, like, well, yeah, if I had to focus on something, it would be perfectionism, performance anxiety, people pleasing. And so, so with the perfectionism, see clients for it, but it can also show up as, as us. And so going back to the conversation that I had with my supervisor in my traineeship, like I didn't have to say that I was a perfectionist. Like, she could pick it out. I mean, anybody could probably pick it. Just look at me like, okay, yeah. So without knowing about my, dance background or any of that, which is of course where that probably stems from. But I have always been like open to feedback. Like, again, with the dance world, like, you want the corrections, you want the feedback, even if you yourself aren't taking class. Like, if you're injured or you're sick, you're still like, you have to go to class. You're sitting at the front with your notepad and taking notes. And anytime anybody else gets a correction, whether you feel like it's applicable to you or not, you take that down, because maybe it is applicable, or you're still thinking about that. So I've always loved what I wasn't doing as much was asking for it. So anytime it was provided to me, like, oh yes, absolutely, take that in, but I wasn't asking for it as much as I like realized that I wanted to, because I was honestly kind of intimidated, especially like with my supervisor being the clinical director, the head of the trauma recovery center, like the big head honcho. Now, I like being right underneath the head honchos, essentially, because what better way to learn than just, going back, whatever, go straight to the source. But because of that, like, I still like, maybe there's people pleasing in there too. Like, I want to show, like, I can be this person. Like, I'm competent. I am, but I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing at the same time. And it makes sense for me to not, know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm literally new. And so that kind of got in the way of my progress, but that getting in the way of the progress, that being my own self and so letting go of, I don't have to be perfect. I'm not expected to be perfect. Certainly not as a trainee, but really never. Perfection does not exist. So
Perfection's an illusion, like control is an illusion.
The difference between being content and being complacent. So being complacent, the way I see it, is like, oh yeah, like I made progress. Or like, this is where I am. I'm just gonna, like, I'm cool. Like, it's fine. I don't need to, whatever. And then content is, I can be happy with where I am, who I am, what I am, while also still working towards being better. And that's how I like get around my perfectionism. Like I'm not just like stopping. I am still striving to be better. But that doesn't mean just because I'm not where I want to be, or because I'm not who I want to be right now, doesn't mean I'm absolute shit right now, or doesn't mean I'm absolutely nowhere right now. I can be happy with who, where, what I am, while still striving to be better, not perfect, because again, perfection does not exist. I am saying it out loud multiple times because I know I'm not the only one that needs to hear it, but I know I do need to hear it.
Yeah, there's a saying that you're only in competition with yourself, and be better than you were yesterday, and then you're doing just fine. Yeah, but we can be in this petri dish of perfection, which comes with a whole array of difficulties, especially like social constructs. When you were talking, it made me think of like something recently that I like was like wading through, was going into an office again one day a week. And here I am, like getting on my blazer and, like looking all professional. And I felt this was a friction within myself. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? This isn't me. Why am I people pleasing, perfectionism in a way? And I shedded that, and I put on my hoodie and my jeans and my combat boots. And I went in, I even made a post on my social media about it. It was like, here it is. Like I put heading into my second day at the office, where I make my own schedule, support fellow humans, and wear the clothes that authentically represent me. And then it went on like different things, I won't read it all, but I'm like, I felt so good going into the office because I had shedded that petri dish of perfectionism, or the perception or illusion of perfectionism. So,
and that's a perfect example of how it does not matter like where you come from, how old you are, how much experience you have, what your licensure level is. Like it's everywhere.
It shows up. Yeah, just when you least expect it, it shows back up, right?
So. But you were aware of it, and you caught it. Like, you know what the fuck am I doing? None of that. We're not doing that. Yeah, goodbye.
Yeah.
And hello to the real me.
Yeah. Going back to your niche areas, and I know you say niche and I say niche, and we're going to say tomato, right? We talked about that. Was it last episode? We're like, I noticed you were saying niche and I was saying niche, but that's just, that's all.
You know what? It's really funny because usually like I say niche. I don't know why I'm saying
niche.
The other way.
What do you say? What do you say?
Niche. It's French. I studied.
I say niche also.
Yeah, so, but like in this podcast, I've noticed I've been saying niche. Like, where the fuck is this coming from? I don't know.
It's the perfectionism kicking in. Being a live sample for everybody who is witness to this. So let's not get caught. Over perfection is now coming to the surface for me. So yes. So, but what I was going to say with niche is, it's good that, to me, from watching you like go from associate heading towards licensure, right? Really defining who your ideal client is, what you want to be doing with your ideal client, the niche that you're in, the specialty, all that, like fine tuning it. And also that path that you're pursuing, it's like you have an invested interest in it. And wow, what benefits your clients are going to be getting from it. Because of the invested interest that you have in it. You're naturally drawn. You're probably paying attention to like what is waking you up. And that's wonderful. So
I was thinking too, like, as you were saying, like, you recognizing the journey between or from whatever, like, yeah, you knew me not from the very beginning, but you knew me before I graduated. before I even officially became an associate.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's like deconstructing, it is like almost 7 o'clock at night, deconstructing those perceptions of reality, of social constructs, and like just kind of like filtering all through that. And instead going, what do I believe in? What are my values? How do I show up in this world? Very much act-based. What am I doing? Doing the things that matter, like all those different things, because friggin' you only live once. Like shedding that. I know I'm making it sound easier than it is because it's layers upon layers upon layers. But when you finally get to the other side, and I don't know if you actually get to the other side, but you make your way in progress, like shedding that perfectionism, the people pleasing, the fawning, becoming aware of it. Wow, you get to live your life beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
And you define that, not society.
Right.
So you get to decide if you want the friggin' blazer or if you want the hoodie with skeletons on it, which is what I chose.
Fair enough. And for me, there are days where I'm very like, yep, I'm feeling blazery today. Others, I'm not. I am feeling skeleton sweatshirty.
Right. And the reality is some practices have dress codes that limit that. And so sometimes you have to like appease to be able to go to that workplace. There's a thing within fawning called please and appease. So just being aware that if you're fawning by doing a dress code versus, actually having to do a dress code. So the reality of it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Is the dress code mandated or is the dress code internalized and you're like doing that yourself?
Right, which is very much what was happening for me. I was doing it to myself and I was causing my own internal conflict. And like, I have my own practice. So why am I like, no, I'm going to show up as authentically me. Like, why am I doing that? So, but if I wanted to wear a blazer or a nice dress top, like I have those in my closet now too, because my shipment from Japan came in. So
as long as you're doing it for you.
Yeah, they are sitting in blue bags, like to keep the moisture out and everything. I haven't officially unpacked, but I do have them if I want it. And I'd be doing it for me, not for anybody else or the perception of anyone else, because more likely than not, people aren't going to be paying attention. And if you're showing up as authentically you, they don't care what clothes you're wearing, as long as it's not like, derogatory or like, like causing, like you're saying, I don't know. I used to have the shirt called Espresso for Depresso or something like that, which is fine. But as long as it's not like causing damage to your clients, I think it's appropriate. So show up as you.
Makes sense to me.
Sounds good. Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't know if that's your saying.
Right.
I get you're saying now. Were there any other points that you wanted to? I know this is probably more your domain because it is your great interest within it. So, are there any other key points you wanted to make?
Okay, what were the the three? Were perfectionism, people pleasing, and there was a third.
Fawning.
Oh, it was another P that started with a P. Perfectionism, people pleasing, and
Progress. I don't know. Was there another P?
I think performance anxiety. I had mentioned it.
Oh, okay. I was like, we're heading into like the perfectionist loop again. But yes,
Yeah.
anxiety. Very cool. Yeah.
I just remember being like, ooh, that's catchy. 3 Ps. Yeah. So I guess maybe as a way to wrap up. So perfectionism shows up everywhere, no matter what your level of expertise is, what your background is, how early it showed up, who it, or how it developed. Be aware of it and give yourself grace for it. So there's the self-compassion in it. With the people pleasing, that also shows up in, again, many more ways than that we would prefer. It shows up in the workplace. It shows up in family and friendship relationships, romantic relationships with yourself. That's the other thing too. Yeah. Like people pleasing, that I allow. Right? Like I should be doing
please yourself.
Yeah. Like I'm doing things for me. And that's, with the values, I'm doing things for me, as in I'm doing things that align with my values.
Doing
If that
things.
happens to benefit other people in the process, great. Congratulations for you. But I'm doing it for me. I have to.
Mm-hmm. Doing things that you would tell your best friend to do, to bring that back forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then with the performance anxiety, that can keep you from doing or keeps you doing anything of the aforementioned. Performance anxiety can keep you from trying something new, keeping you from progressing because of the fear of perfection, or well, really the fear of not being perfect keeps you from trying anything at all. And that's what's really going to keep you from being perfect, if it even exists, which of course it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So just fucking do it.
Yeah, just fucking do it. Nike. Do you remember very first episode, and the first thing I said was, my microphone has been sitting in the closet for a year.
Yeah.
Guess what was standing in my way of like actually doing the podcast? It was, am I good enough? Perfectionist. And it was like, fuck this. I think we've said fuck a lot in this episode. So this is definitely going to be an explicit episode. But I'm like, just shed that and just do it. Just fucking do it. And I think that became my motto. And then you're like, let's do it. And then here we are, episode.
Well, I love that we independently had the idea of doing a podcast like this, and then it like came up in a conversation casually.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you would suggest, I don't know. I just remember, I think I accidentally said yes to it, or I didn't realize like, oh, wait, like this was not just a half joking thing, that this was a serious thing. I was like, oh yeah, like we should do it together. I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be cool. Then no, like it actually happened. We just fucking did it.
Yeah. And it organically happened. It wasn't like, I mean, yes, it takes some skill to be able to like do the podcast as far as like the editing and like all of that and like how to show up with the structure. But we even named the podcast Therapist Off Script.
We don't have any scripts.
We do not have any scripts. I will write down things as like you're talking just to like be able to like expand on it, because if I don't write it, it's gone. But that's all my script is just some key words as we're talking. I mean, I might have like that thing that I have written down on my computer to pull from, but really it's unscripted. And part of that is like the anxiety within. I used to have to be so scripted and planned and control the illusion of control to like temper my anxiety. But I've reached a point, it's like, no, I'm just gonna just fucking do it.
Well, also if you have a script and you're so focused on like sticking with that, inevitably you're gonna mess up, even if it's like reading a word wrong, then you're gonna beat yourself up, and there's the perfectionism again. Like, nope.
Right. And I am so careful with pronouncing, but I just roll with it. Like I am the worst at pronouncing some words, and oftentimes I will leave it in when I'm editing because it shows me authentically me, right? Mm-hmm. Even our logo is a skeleton on Therapist Off Script because of the rebel nature that is produced with that image. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and the blues and the greens and the waves is like, it makes me think of like anxiety, like waves can carry us away or can come in waves, and that's okay. We're just going to go out into the waves. And I'm deathly afraid of the ocean, even though have we talked about sharks? Did you ever share that story?
Yeah, we did. I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast. Yeah, I think we did.
Okay. Well, you just get out with the sharks. I'm never going to be in a shark cage like you did.
Don't recommend it. I will say that. I'm alive. Yes, that was. No, don't do that one.
Yeah. But proverbially, I will like surf the waves of life within anxiety, and I will embrace the discomfort, and I will like deconstruct the petri dish of perfectionism. And yes, it still shows up for me. I'm not perfect. There's another P for you. I'm not perfect, but that's okay. I'm just going to bring it along with me, which is part of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is me using my own tools on me in order to benefit my clients and myself. So being my own best friend.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, like the therapy is a journey. We walk alongside them on their journey, but in doing so, we are also on that journey.
Yeah. And if we're carrying a lot of bags of shit, along the way. Like, we should probably be looking through those bags and processing our own stuff in order to show up our best selves to travel the road with our clients.
Mhm.
Well, I think that's where we'll end.
Sounds good to me.
If you'd like to hear more, please do not forget to like and subscribe on your favorite platform.
You can learn more about us at therapistoffscript.com or by visiting us on Instagram at therapistoffscript.
We welcome connections, comments, and feedback,
Or to simply say hi.
by engaging with us on Instagram or through our website.
Thanks for spending time with us today, where we dive deep, join together, and empower others. We are Therapists Off Script.
Be sure to check out our show notes for links and resources shared within this episode.